It has been a busy day for many of us. So I'm very happy that we reached the final panel for today's workshop. And I'm very happy to invite here two very important guests that most of you, or at least the colleagues from Ukraine know very well. Andrey KURKOV and Andriy LYUBKA. They are two very important public intellectuals in Ukraine, and we invited them today for a discussion about the role of literature, of the arts in the current war in Ukraine. I was mentioning this morning that several years ago, NEC started a fellowship program meant to invite here writers. There were several writers from Ukraine, Russia, Georgia, that had fellowships at NEC. Andriy was one of them. And I was also saying that starting last year, NEC has a special program for translators. It's called Tandem, and it brings here authors and translators from Black Sea countries. So the second year we have just received applications this program. I don't have any special competencies to present the two guests. I'm a historian, but looking at the book by Andrey KURKOV, I found a very good connection. Just 2 weeks ago, I think, I presented the paper at NEC on the Snake Island, and the famous picture here that everyone knows, and the famous Roman Hribov, the guy who, at the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion, replied in a way to show Ukrainians' determination to fight. I'm also very, let's say, competent to present Andriy LYUBKA, because also 2 weeks ago, I think, Andriy sent us a text with an article that he wrote in English, and I translated the article with Anna together, and it was published in Romanian on a very visible platform. So the Romanians could read what an Ukrainian author has to say at the anniversary of 2 years since Russia's full-scale invasion. So Andriy, so they are from generations. Andrey KURKOV started writing by the time Andriy LYUBKA was born. They are equally active in the past 10 years, not only in the past 2 years, in using the arts, literature, books, novels, poetry, and so on, in order to raise awareness about Ukraine, the Ukrainian state, Ukrainian nation, and so on. I was looking at their CVs, and I found 3 interesting things that put them together very well. One is that they are both philologists. They graduated philology. Andrey KURKOV, he's an expert in Japanese, as far as I know. You are. Yes. And Andriy, he's also translating now books from Polish and from Balkan languages, from Serbian, so on. So they have this common background in letters, philology, and the second thing that is common to both of them is that they are visible public intellectuals. They are very vocal in the past 2 years, I would say, but even before this moment. They are both writing essays, and Andrey was telling us last evening that his fiction, he has little time now to write fiction because he's so focused on the world beyond the literary one. And it's the same for Andrey LYUBKA, who has brought to us this nice book, his latest publication. Yes. So they are vocal, they are involved in different initiatives in Ukraine and abroad. They travel a lot, they have different events in Ukraine and in Europe. And we were discussing earlier about public intellectuals. We have them here, yes. And the third element that is common to their writings is that they are funny guys. And you can see this by looking at their literature. They like humor and they use it a lot, including in reference to the events of the past 2 years and the past 10 years. And it's a valuable weapon that they both have. And I think that's very, very precious for such a discussion. I have a long list of things about them, but I will just allow them to speak. And once again, thanks for being here tonight and for taking the time to speak about Ukraine and how literature is a very important weapon in this war. Thank you. So, can use this one. Just these.
Good afternoon. As I am 20 years older, I will start and I will talk about the past a bit, and then I will pass the word to Andrei, and I hope actually we will have a lot to say, and then we'll be happy to answer the questions. And first thing that comes to my mind when I'm thinking about Ukrainian literature and about how I became part of Ukrainian literature is in 1999 when I had my first public events in Germany. I was presenting my book, Picnic of the Ice, Death and the Penguin. And the questions from the audience were not about the book. I was immediately asked, can you tell us about corruption in Ukraine? Yeah. Can I tell you about something else in Ukraine? So actually, I think that happened to every Ukrainian writer, poet, intellectual who started coming to Europe, because the reputation of Ukraine from 1991 was never positive until actually recently. And people wanted to hear the truth. They didn't trust any political messengers coming from Ukraine. And they traditionally trusted writers and creative people. And so all Ukrainian writers had to explain Ukraine to foreign audiences, not to explain their books, but to explain their country. And this became a tradition, and I think this is why we are here also. I mean, I am not academic, Andrei is not academic yet. But I have my own theories about everything. And I will share with you a couple of my theories. First of all, in 1991, 92, and later, Ukraine was divided into two parts, but it was the border between two mentalities that was divided. Moving faster than the Ukrainian language was returning to the territories from which it was expelled by Russian politicians. So if we had time and waited for another 30, 40 years, the border between Ukrainian mentality and would be no reason for Russia to attack Ukraine. Of course, it was visible from Russia. They were afraid that Ukraine is becoming more and more different because Ukraine is becoming more and more Ukrainian. Because in fact, actually, 300 years of aggression against Ukrainian national identity finally succeeded in the Soviet Union by practically almost removing Ukrainian identity and Ukrainian mentality from Ukrainian territory. So the only island, real island of Ukrainian traditional mentality remained Western Ukraine, which became part of the Soviet Ukrainian Republic only de facto in 1945. I have my own theory. What is a happy state? It's a very short theory. Happy state, it's a country where 5 spaces coincide. Geopolitical space is actually the picture or the form of the country. The same is with cinema. I mean, you know what is national release of the films. Foreign films are released nationally on the same day. Ukrainian films are never released on the same day. They are shown in several cinemas on different dates. I will not try to analyze why it is happening, but this situation is one of the reasons of the war that we have today also. Because when we were organizing cultural events in Kyiv 10 years ago, 15 years ago, people in Donbass, people in Crimea, even in Odessa region, people were reading Russian books by Russian authors. They were watching Russian television. They were discussing the news about Ukraine that they watched on Russian TV. And this was normal for them. And we didn't pay attention to this, thinking that actually, or believing in the cliches which were created by regional politicians. And 2 most dangerous and still existing cliches in Ukraine are that all people in Donbass are criminals and all people in Western Ukraine is true, but it didn't influence Ukrainian society. And in fact, yes, people in Kyiv were always, and people of Donbass were also afraid subconsciously of Western Ukrainians from Lviv. So, I mean, we can talk a lot about this, but now back to the literature. In 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the Soviet literature, Ukrainian literature, disappeared. In fact, actually it disappeared even 2 or 3 years before, because in the Soviet time, the literature was published on the command, on the order of the state, bought by the state, recycled in the state, and reused. The paper was reused to create new Soviet Ukrainian literature. It was not in demand, except for people like Pavlo Zagrebelny, Oles Gonchar, and several other writers. But in 1991, it was the total full stop for the Soviet literature, and people who wanted to read, they looked around and they were expecting a new Ukrainian literature. But as you know, it takes 10 years to create the beginning of the new literature. We had Vasily Gerasimuk. We had some poets who remained: Vasily Gerasimuk, Igor Irmaruk. We had Yurko Andrukhovich. We had Oksana Zabushka and several other writers. But 7 writers don't make literature. And at that moment, young independent publishers understood that you can sell books. And they started actually selling, first of all, books about what do you call it, popular medicine, science fiction, crime stories, etc. Everything that didn't exist before. And for 5 or 7 years, slowly, the Ukrainian book market was taken over actually by Russian publishing houses, who brought to Ukraine millions of copies, first of all, of translated books in literary generation appeared. From my point of view, it was 97, 98. They were minority. They were a tiny minority. They had their audience, but the audience was small. And in fact, modern Ukrainian literature was sabotaged in the first 10 years by the teachers of Ukrainian literature of older generation. It's a very interesting topic, but Ukrainian writers at that time, they wanted to be apolitical. They didn't want to write about social and political issues. And it lasted until Orange Revolution. Only with Orange Revolution, Ukrainian literature becomes militant, slowly. Today it is very militant. But today the writers are more militant than their militant books. Because, I mean, to be a writer now doesn't mean to write. It means actually you have a status. Because of this status, you have freedom to say what you want to say, to do what you want to do, and to be visible and to be active. And I should mention that historical literature, which was written from time to time, including by writers like Oksana Zabushka, this was our political literature, because Ukrainian history, which was banned in the Soviet time and was rediscovered after 91, it became an instrument of political influence on the society. And today, the soldiers in the trenches, they're asking their friends to send them books, but non-fiction books, not fiction books, about Ukrainian history. But this is a separate topic. We will touch it probably later. But another phenomena which doesn't have anything to do until 2022, but has something to do with 2014. After the beginning of the war in Donbass, and before 2022, 400,000 Ukrainian men and women went through the front lines of Donbass. They were military, volunteers, etc. And they started writing non-fiction, diaries, memoirs, notes, etc. And they created parallel Ukrainian veterans literature. There was a small conflict between traditional writers and veteran writers. And there was the most sort of noisy conflict was about their place on the book festivals. Because, I mean, some of the organizers, they were afraid that the veteran writers are too radical and they will attract too much attention or will be publicly unhappy about something. But in fact, actually, these veteran writers wrote and published more than 200 books about the war in Donbass, mostly non-fiction. And they set up their own publishing houses, like Publishing House Belka and others, to publish their books. And now today, when we have more than 40 writers, traditional writers, as soldiers on the front line, we have between 30 and 40 writers and poets and publishers killed by Russians, either by missiles or executed like Volodymyr Vakulenko, or by probably Andrei will talk about this more, and then I will add. So now these two literatures are united again, because both traditional writers are writing about the war, non-fiction, and non-professional writers, veterans, are writing about their experience today. I will pass now the mic to Andrei, and at some point probably Mike will come back.
Thank you. Thank you. Actually, I have to disagree with you, because our event is called discussion, so we have to discuss something and disagree. But to be sincere, I have nothing to add about this trend of Ukrainian literature, which was developing through the years of our independence. And I would like to focus on the role of literature now. And I will start with 3 private examples. last year we had a short tour with readings in the southern Ukrainian cities like Odessa, Mykolaiv, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. Zaporizhia is really, really close to the front line, and air alert is usually turned on after the missile is already on the ground. So it is really dangerous to gather there, and with Irina Tsilik and Serhiy Zhadan, we had an event in the bomb shelter underground, and our organizers of the event made a huge mistake because they opened the registration. Usually, for example, when you have now event in Kharkiv or in Zaporizhia, you don't share the location. So you ask people to register, and only after that you send them the location, because it is dangerous, and gathering of pro-Ukrainian people is really like target, really target for the attacks. So we went to Zaporizhia, and the mistake of our organizers was that they didn't close the Google form for the registration. And 648 people registered for the event. And the capacity of the point was only 320 people. And it was really a quarrel in front of the door there. It was maybe a type of oral fight, because a lot of people wanted to join reading of Ukrainian poetry. It is a miracle, because before the war, of course, we had different events and they were quite popular, but usually you can gather 50 people, 100 people, and see that interest of the audience, interest of the people is so huge, was for us a bit surprising. And we saw the same, for example, in Mykolaiv. Our event lasted reading. So it is really boring thing, yeah. If I am an audience, I don't want to sit for 3.5 hours and listen to readings and ask and answering some question and so on. But people attended. We gathered cinema in Mykolaiv, and we stayed there for 3.5 hours, and it was we had the feeling that it is really important. Maybe for the first time in my life, I understood that what we are doing, what we can share, is really important for the audience. It is not like we are advertising our books and and say that it is interesting, please buy it, and so on. It was really important to meet together and to speak, because literature became very important part of intellectual and maybe even spiritual life of Ukrainians. From this point, I would like to go to another fact. For example, 2023 was the most successful year for our publishing house, for me as a writer also, in terms of profits and financials and so on, because our print runs doubled. And it is very strange, because a lot of millions of Ukrainians went abroad. We have economic crisis, we have a lot of problems. First of all, we have to donate to support our army, to buy drones, jeeps, and so on and so on. But people started to buy more and more books. And we saw it in 2022. In very first months of the invasion, our book market collapsed, because it was hard to work for our printing houses, not only for publishers, and a lot of people flee. Our biggest center for publishing center in Ukraine is Kharkiv, and a lot of the spots were bombed. Book, it is not only about the writer, but about editors, printers, graphics, and so on and so on. So, and these links between these people were broken because a lot of people became refugees, displaced persons, and so on. But I think that maybe since July 22, we saw that this book market, this literature world, started to show some, signs of alive status, and it started from the children literature. I live in Uzhgorod, it is on the border with Slovakia, and a lot of publishers called to me and asked me to help them transport books through the border, because a lot of refugees most of the refugees went abroad with their children, and they discovered that they need Ukrainian books for them, because it was important for them not to forget our alphabet, Cyrillic, not to forget Ukrainian language, and so on and so on. And for them, symbolically, it was important to have this Ukrainian book. And for first times, it was quite easy, because I asked some drivers to, few boxes to transport to Slovakia and send by DHL. But since July 22, I discovered that it is impossible, that we have to buy tiers and, and export these books as tiers. And children literature, actually, because all of these printing spots were bombed or stopped their active work, we were out of print runs of children literature. And the end of the 22 was marked with the fact that our publishers receive some kind of profit by the end of the year. So it was not zero, it was not minus, it was not collapse, but by the end of the year, we can say that it was successful year in terms of selling books. And in 2023, I think it is maybe our some kind of one of the biggest success. There were more than 25 new bookshops opened in Ukraine. And for example, in Kyiv, it was like a hipster big bookshop like Karturescu, or this big one with 3 floors in Bucharest, was opened just 2 weeks ago at the Hreshchatyk, at the main street. And every month we have this new big bookshop opened in Kyiv as a business investment. It is not like, we want to do something for humanity and so on. It is business. And I think that this phenomena show how culture, not only literature, because in theaters we also have sold out. And for example, it is impossible to buy tickets for Ivan Franko Theater, to buy tickets for theatrical play Konotopska Vidma, which from Konotop, because you can buy it only at black market for really big money, maybe 5 times more than from the ticket office, because it is so popular. And despite of these tragic events, we see we are participants and witnesses of some kind of cultural renaissance of Ukrainian culture. And it is hard to say why. What are the real reasons for it? But I think that, first of all, when we speak about the literature, it is people who start to read Ukrainian in order to enrich their vocabulary, Ukrainian vocabulary, because they want to switch the language. But second one, which is not so obvious, but which I saw and had as my private experience, literature really became some kind of psychotherapy for people. And culture helps people to sustain their mental state, mental health. And because it is sharing the experience, it is about some really important issues. It is about existentialism and so on and so on. And once more, it is very important now because this type of danger, everyday danger, this type of everyday stress provoke people to think about some important things. And culture, literature especially, provides them this possibility.
I'll just say a few words. You said you don't know why it is happening. In fact, actually, yeah, psychologically, first of all, people are trying to get away from the reality. They are not trying to get away from the reality and hide into the books, but they go to the theater because emotionally, theater is much more powerful and it takes you away from the reality. And in the beginning of the war, there were no plays about the war. So people were watching classical Ukrainian dramas, foreign dramas. But today, there are a lot of new plays about the war. So there is no escape also in the theater, but people still go and watch these plays. The other thing is that the reason for this incredible, I would say, increase in the sales of books partially is because volunteers who are buying books to send to 500 destroyed village libraries in Ukraine. So we have not only traffic of books for the refugees from Ukraine, we have traffic of books from Kyiv, from Lviv, to Donbass, to Zaporizhia, Kherson, Chernigiv, and Sumy. And how long it will last, we don't know, because, I mean, in the wartime, you cannot talk about stability. This was the phenomena of the last year. It might be phenomena this year again, but it can be over. The other thing is that in the beginning of the war, when everybody was escaping from Kyiv, all public intellectuals found themselves in Lviv, and Lviv became for several months the capital, intellectual, cultural capital. Some of the writers were offered residencies abroad. They went abroad, and many countries helped a lot Ukrainian writers and poets and translators to survive. By May 22, June 22, Ukrainian writers started coming back to Kharkiv, to Kyiv, home, and by that time, they were already not writers. They were witnesses. They were public witnesses of what is happening because everybody who was translated in foreign language was addressed by foreign journalists, magazines, newspapers, asked to write articles, asked to give interviews. And from this moment, practically, this movement of sharing the experience, counteracting Russian narrative and Russian propaganda became one of the first probably goals and tasks of Ukrainian writers. I mean, like Markian Kamish, a young writer who wrote an excellent book about illegal travel in the Chernobyl zone. He went as a volunteer to the front. He was participating in the actually battle of Bakhmut, etc. He was writing from the trenches regularly for Italian newspaper La Repubblica. Artem Chekh was writing for another newspaper. So, I mean, the writers, soldiers were writing from the front lines. And the writers, not soldiers, were writing from where they were settled. And actually, also from the beginning of the war, there was a huge demand for Ukrainian writers to go and to talk at the conferences and to do fundraising events abroad. And many writers who could travel, they started collecting money. They started actually also talking publicly, also on European and American TV, about what was happening. And actually, thanks to this activity, Ukraine won in the information war in Europe. Unfortunately, we couldn't win in Latin America or in Africa because it is too far away and because we never had close connections, cultural connections between Ukraine and Global South. But it was not the only function of Ukrainian writers, because writers like Andriy LYUBKA immediately from the beginning of the war started collecting money and buying second-hand jeeps and pickup trucks to drive to the front line. And I want Andriy to tell us about the writers and their voluntary actions to help Ukrainian army.
Yeah, actually, my book is about this. It is a recent book. It was published only 2 weeks ago. In English, I think that we can call it War from the Back, from the Rear. And it is about jeeps. It is my photo from shot in Donbas region. When the big invasion started, I was really disappointed with the role of words, with writing and giving interviews and so on. And I decided, for me, actually, emotionally, was really important to do something concrete, that not to write, yeah, and share my experience and publish something, and But for me, the best way in very first days of the invasion was to work as a physical worker. In my hometown in Uzhgorod, we were working. We were loading trains from Kharkiv, which came from Kharkiv, because we have this longest line in Ukraine from Uzhgorod to Kharkiv. It is direct train which goes for 26 hours. And a lot of refugees in the first days of March were coming to Uzhgorod, but nobody went in return to Kharkiv. It was empty. And it was the only fast logistic way to deliver something to the eastern Ukraine, these trains, and they were empty. So we were loading all the boxes with humanitarian aid, medicines, and so on. And for me, it was really like a possibility to survive psychologically, because I was loading these boxes, and then I had possibility to fall asleep, because you are tired physically, and you have this feeling as a writer, yeah, that you do something concrete. You know that this box is like this, and in one day, somebody in Kharkiv, it was connection with Serhiy Zhadan Charitable Foundation, will receive it in Kharkiv and deliver it to the hospitals, to the front line, and so on and so on. And at that time, for me, it was much more important than literature. And after that, completely by accident, started my main voluntaristic occupation with these second-hand cars and jeeps and pickups, because I called my friend. It was Easter, and in my region we have this special Easter sausage, smoked in right way and so on. And my friend, totally civilian guy who went as a volunteer to the army, at that time he was already in Donbas, and I called him that I would like to send him this sausage to his battalion, to his unit, so they can feel like at home. Yeah, it was a stupid idea, but he told me, I'm in the forest somewhere between Slovyansk and Svatohirsk, so we don't have any vehicle or transport, any car, and it is 20 kilometers from me to the nearest civilization, and I don't know how to receive these sausages, because there is no courier, taxis, and so on here in the forest. What we really need jeep, because it was newly formed unit, and it was built from really zero. Yeah, it is civilians as a soldiers, without they received Kalashnikovs, they received uniforms, but nothing like technical or another support. So I decided that it would be nice to buy them a jeep, and I thought that, okay, we will gather money now with in our small circle between our friends. But still, it is quite hard to write to everyone on Facebook, messengers, that do you want to support this idea and so on. So I wrote it as a post on Facebook. Friends who want to support our friend Misha, who is now in Donbas, they need Jeep, let's buy it. And I give my bank card number in the post. And it was really like a very strange for me situation, because I was surprised, to be sincere, because my phone started to vibrate without any stops. So I turned it off, and the next morning when I woke up, I discovered that I have money for 2 jeeps at my account. And since that time, through Facebook, as a writer, because my audience, my followers are, are my readers. Actually, it is very literary story. Since that time, I gathered more than 1,200,000 euros, bought 255 jeeps, and went to the front line for 38 times, because we deliver these jeeps to the soldiers directly to their hands. And it is my main occupation. And when I started to do it, and it became so huge, a lot of people started to say me, you have to write some notes about it, because it is interesting story. And you have to write some notes about the people who support you, about these readers, about, I don't know, some small children who decided they don't want gifts for their 9th birthday, but they want to give this money to support Ukrainian army. You have to write about these civilians, because in the West, there is a stereotype that, our army is very professional, very good, very well trained, and so on. Yes, partially, but majority of this army are civilians, like my friends, who were activists, eco-activists from different, from different spheres. They are now enlisted to the army, so it is army of civilians. And you have to write their stories about what are they doing, why they decided to go to the army in the very first days, and so on. And I answered them for a long time that yes, I will. It is very important. But then I was obliged to do it, because I received support from IWM, from Documenting Ukraine. They send me money, and I realized that now I'm obliged to, to produce something. And I have no time for writing, on focusing for in some big, long genres and so on. I started to make notes and very, very short stories, like very short essays about my experience, people, and the whole process and so on. And then it was at that time when we started, I thought that it will be very optimistic book, because I will share some very good stories about some wonderful people who can be wonderful examples of, some human ideals and so on and so on. But by the end of the last year, I realized that a lot of people I wrote about, they were already killed. So because war is lasting, and one of my friends, he was a painter, totally civilian, without any military experience before, who went to the army as a volunteer on the second day of invasion. Actually, he was the icon painter in churches. It was his haltura. He received money because he went to villages and make some icons on walls, and it was his money for living. And we met with him for several times at the front line. And then he was wounded in Bakhmut in the previous winter. And when he was in hospital, we had a chat, and he told me that he is like a cat. He had 9 lives, because he was he served for the first time at Southern Front near Kherson, Snihurivka, then in Bakhmut, and he's still alive. And he was really proud of it, that I'm really lucky guy. And when war is lasting for 2 years or 10 years, you can have 9 lives, but it is still not enough. And a lot of the protagonists, a lot of heroes of this book, unfortunately, are already died. And I went to the funeral of this guy. He was very beautiful. He was very nice in terms of his beauty as a man. And he was his funeral was in this closed truna coffin, yeah, because he was so damaged. And his mother came to me and told me that she's very grateful that I wrote this piece about him, because it means for her that memory about him will live a bit longer, not forever, but a bit longer. And it was a moment when I realized that as a writer, it is my duty to be to document these events, to document war crimes, to document details about these people who are fighting, about the civilians, and as a result, I have this book.
I just want you mentioned war crimes. Activities of Ukrainian writers are connected also with documenting war crimes. And the most active writer in this sphere was Victoria Amelina, who was killed by a Russian missile last summer. And actually, once the war started, she stopped writing prose. She's author of 2 novels, of some essays, 1 book for children, and of poems. And she stopped writing. She was trained by foreign NGOs to how to document the war crimes. And she was taking all the time foreign journalists and writers to the front lines, to the war zone. But also she was documenting war crimes, and she was collecting stories, real stories of the crimes, of Russian military crimes against women. And she was preparing a book about this. This book remains unfinished, but I hope it will be published and will be used in The Hague during the investigations and court proceedings. We mentioned also one of the cult writers and poets of Ukraine, Serhiy Zhadan. He was the one who restarted cultural life 2 months after the beginning of the new invasion. He started the book launches and readings in the Kharkiv underground, in the metro. And so the culture in the beginning of the war was rediscovered in the bomb shelters and in the metro stations, in the platforms. In Kyiv, there were 7 platforms where films were shown to people who were hiding from the bombs. Also, book launches started to take place in different places. So, I mean, for several months, we had real underground culture under the bombs and missiles. And slowly, actually, it came up to the surface. And it remains in the surface until today. And it's becoming more and more important. And you said that you don't know why poems are so popular now. In fact, actually, people stopped reading fiction at the same time as writers stopped writing fiction. But poems remained important and became even more important. First of all, because the poems are giving emotional energy to people who listen to them, and the people have immediate reaction. And so, I mean, when they listen to the poems, they think they are almost subconsciously involved in the poems, but they are more involved in their own life, their own problem, in their thoughts about their loved ones, children, wives, etc. And I was witness of 3-hour-long poetry readings. And then actually the soldiers and the civilians wanted to buy books of poems, and it was never enough for everybody. So, I mean, we are living in the time when the poetry in Ukraine, although this poetry is very pathetic sometimes and very patriotic, but it's becoming the main hit of literature in Ukraine. But there is a black hole if we talk about contemporary novel. So there are only several writers who still write novels. It's Andrey KURKOV, who writes crime novels, but also books for adolescents and sometimes historical books. It's science fiction writer Max Kidruk. And can you name somebody else? Yeah, Yurko, a writer who lives near Lviv. And one thing, actually, Yurko is one of the most important writers in Ukraine. Several days ago, he wrote on Facebook that he was crying because his reader, Vlodzo, reader for many years, was killed in the front. So, I mean, the writers are losing a lot of readers in this war, because the first volunteers who rushed to the front were the representatives of civil society, and civil society is the active part of readers. But also the readers are losing writers like Victoria Amelina, Volodymyr Vakulenko, and Boris Gumenyuk, and many others. So in fact, the literature and the culture after the war in Ukraine will be incomplete. Incomplete, it is already incomplete because we have the situation when the publishers are publishing more books which are translated from foreign languages than books written by Ukrainian writers, because there is not enough written by Ukrainian writers. And now we have less Ukrainian writers alive than before. So there will be definitely a very difficult period for Ukrainian literature. I don't know how it will be named by the philologists, but obviously it will be a period in which there will be almost no fiction, and there will be too much military non-fiction and too much poetry.
Just to finish with something optimistic with example, yeah. So it is real example from the last day. I will launch this book in Kyiv in April, and we are not planning to do it in the bookshop or in some hall or something like this. We will launch it in the theater, big theater. So we are waiting for some 400 people with tickets and so on. So it is the scale of popularity of literature and the importance of literature now in Ukraine. And it is more about, you know, statistic and so on. But for me, what was very touching and give me a lot of hope in what we are doing in our lives, when we receive these people who were fleeing from the war, from the east and the south of Ukraine. Usually they came with one backpack with very, very strange things in it, because it was like, you know, under stress. But a lot of them came with a book in their backpack. And when I asked one of my friends, why did you take this Ababa Halamaha edition of poetry, very, very small book, very, very nice, cozy. And she told me that for her, it symbolized this coziness of her home and private library, private life. And I think that for writer, we are living now in very harsh times, but for writers and for different people from this culture, I think that it is very important time, because once more we feel importance of our work, and we feel this really strong contact, link with our audience, readers, listeners, and so on. And maybe it is right time for you to also to think about studying this process, this phenomena, because it is ongoing and it is really interesting, and it actually gives is this commercialized world and so on, it gives us hope that culture means a lot. Culture is a type of culture is some part of our defense system as a human beings and as a country. So it is very nice and good topic for research. Maybe someone will support this kind of researches.
Maybe one last very short note, that the phenomena of 22-23 was publications of many books written by refugees from Ukraine in Poland, in Holland, in Denmark, etc. Many of these books were written on request of local publishers. So at some point, there were a lot of Ukrainian books on the special stands in the bookshops with the books by refugees about being a refugee. Today, you will not see these books on sale. I don't know, probably they played its role but they are not republished, reprinted, they disappeared. And what we have now left, traditional Ukrainian literature, more names and more titles than before. So, I mean, the war promoted Ukrainian literature, made it more well-known, and the war led the European readers and publishers to understand that they don't know anything about Ukrainian classical literature because it was overshadowed by Russian classical literature, because people believed that from the territory of ex-Soviet Union, only great Russian literature comes, nothing else. Only now the writers from 19th century, 18th century from Ukraine are being translated and published abroad very slowly in small publishing houses, but still, it is very important. It will remain. And hopefully, these books by the classical Ukrainian writers will become also topics of dissertations and scientific work by students and by young philologists. So this is also the result. It is coming at very high price. But it is true, and we should acknowledge it, and we should support the interest of students to Ukrainian classical literature, and especially to the literature of the so-called executed generation, the left Ukrainian language writers who were very experimentative and very brave in 1920s and 30s, and were almost all shot dead in the camp of Gulag named Sandarmoch in 1937-38. This generation of writers is becoming extremely popular also with young Ukrainian intellectuals. And in the next days, there will be in Lviv a premiere of rap musical about these writers. It's called Ty Romantika, You Romantic, after one of the short stories by Khvylovy, I think, yeah. And another young writer whose name is Martin Yakub, he is using artificial intelligence to create portraits of these writers to sell them in order to collect money for the army. So even dead Ukrainian writers are fundraising for Ukrainian army in order that Ukraine remains safe, independent, and prospering. Thank you very much.
Так, давай сюда сначала зайдем, тут может быть дешевле.
Questions, comments, if you want to ask them. Yes, yes, please take. Yes.
Да, вот.
Okay, it's more like a remark than a question. It's quite easy to be Ukrainian in the West and other places since 24 February 2022, and also probably received the attention as a writer nowadays. But I would like to thank both writers using this opportunity for working before, when probably there wasn't such an attention to what you wrote and what you did. And as I told Andriy LYUBKA today in the morning in the lobby of the hotel, one of my sons who is present here read his novel. And it also happened before the war. So I think it would be a good thing for you to know. And I also told Andrey KURKOV that I read his novel myself. So I think it's today when you have this new generation who truly believes that anything that is not on the internet does not believe. I just hope that you will be popular as writers, and also your colleagues, your co-writers will be popular with these new generations for the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the stories you shared. My question quite easy. Can you please tell about the dynamics of the foreign publishing houses compared to, I don't know, before full-scale invasion, after full-scale invasion, maybe, I don't know, countries and languages? Like, what can you say about the interest?
Do you mean our books or in
Yeah,
general?
your books.
Well, I mean, I had books published in 43 languages before the full-scale
Yeah, I know,
invasion.
but
So
received
it,
more
sorry?
suggestions. Maybe you started to receive more, I don't know, or different
I would
languages.
say the sales became bigger everywhere. And of course, I mean, one of my latest books was The Diary of Invasion, which was immediately translated. And you know that abroad, the publishing houses have, when they accept a book, they will say that we will publish it in 2 years' time, in 3 years' time. So in case of Ukrainian authors, this tradition was broken. So as soon as the translation was ready, the books were published and they were specially promoted. So I mean, the Ukrainian authors, including me, had a special deal, one can say. But it is also understandable because it was very actually, I mean, the Ukrainian war, the aggression of Russia against Ukraine is something that is happening now. And the publishing houses wanted to have books about it now, not in 2 years' time.
Thank you for a very good question. Yeah, because it is not only Ukrainian but international trend to be interested in Ukrainian literature. And as a writer, I received much more requests from different sides, and requests from the literary agency from Paris, and for example. But the main thing is not only that now they have this interest, and we can propose them some titles, some interesting book which can describe, I don't know, history of Ukraine, mentality of Ukrainian people, and so on and so on. One of the biggest problem, which we cannot solve in a moment with scholarships or money or something, we have a lack of translators. And for example, 10 years ago, I went to festival to Rio de Janeiro, and there were no translator from Ukrainian. And we used German as a medium for translation. Last year, I went to one of the biggest festivals in Asia, in Georgetown, in Malaysia. So there were no translator from Ukrainian. I'm not speaking about Spanish contexts and so on and so on. As a Balkanologist, I understand that now, maybe in one generation, in 10 or 15 years, we will receive this wave of translators, because these young people who flee with their moms abroad and will stay and live abroad, and will study at the universities, they will have 2 languages, 2 mother tongues, and actually they will become our ambassadors and translators and scientists in different areas. But for now, this lack of translators is really crucial, and it is impossible to solve it only with government support or Stiftung supports. Yeah, we have to wait for the new generation of people, and maybe after that, like we have the situation with Bosnian literature, with example of Miljenko Jergović, Dubravka Ugrešić, and so on and so on. In 10 or 15 years, we will receive a lot of translations, awards, and so on. But first of all, we have to raise them.
Yeah, I can add also that Christophe Bourgois Publishing House in France, they wanted to publish one of the latest books of Maria Mathios, one of the best writers from Ukraine. And they asked Irina Dmitryshin, who translated her first book, The Sweet Darusia, in French for Gallimard. Irina Dmitryshin was occupied. She has other projects. So they couldn't find another translator, and they just stopped planning this. So this is practically a tragedy for for the French market, I think.
Thank you very much for Andrey and Andriy for your very interesting talk and also a very important work that you are doing in general and you have been doing for years. According to the World Soft Power Index, in 2022, Ukraine ranked in place number 19 within somehow 20 most influential countries in the world. And if to look at the criteria, Ukraine scored a lot in culture. And this means that such voices of Ukrainian writers, Ukrainian artists abroad contributed a lot for making Ukraine more visible, for enhancing the Ukrainian studies. And I think it's also something to consider for the international donors to organize more events like today, bringing academia and also people of culture and going beyond the, let's say, closed environments, inviting broader public, engaging with the broader society. I'm thinking now about the New Europe College and about the fact that in Romania, unfortunately, people know really very little about Ukrainian culture. And it would be really great to consider the possibilities for the future to perhaps have this dialogue also involving the Romanian writers as well, to have this dialogue. Since Romania has been supporting us a lot since the beginning of the war. And here I would like to thank also the New Europe College for supporting Ukrainian writers. My question will be about how do you personally prioritize the invitations which you are receiving to participate in various events? I'm sure that during the recent 2 years, you've been invited to many events. And due to your schedule, you physically perhaps are not able to accept all the invitations. And I'm perhaps more interested in the reasons for rejection, whether there are, whether you have experienced any invitations which you felt uncomfortable to accept. So somehow, yeah, that will be my question. Thank you.
We just discussed when we met today with Andriy, we just discussed our latest rejection because we told each other that both of us rejected participation in Bulgarian festival in Burgas, I think. Yeah. Yes, now you have a lot of, maybe not so much as in 22, but you have a lot of invitation with different agenda offers and so on and so on. First of all, it is impossible to attend everything. And as for me, the very important thing is that, for example, I have this volunteer job. It is like full-time job because it occupies all my time. And when I can choose, I'm going to the Eastern Front Line, to Donbass, or to, I don't know, to some other cities in the Western world, I will choose to go to Donbass. But also, important thing that I am not so young, but quite young male. And it is very hard to receive permission to cross the border. And for example, today here, I am not as a writer. Today here, I am as a volunteer, and I cross the border using this system called Shliach for volunteers. And the official purpose of my travel is to go to buy car. And I really will buy car and will return to Ukraine on a jeep. Yeah, it is awaiting me in Satu Mare. But it is one of the, maybe it is funny, but it is one of the important things, because it is usually when you travel, when you plan your logistics, it is really hard because you have to add 2 additional days to every invitation. And for me, it is important that I'm not, when I am invited to Burgas, for example, in June, for me, it is not a journey when I can go to the Black Sea coast and, you know, and say something and so on. I would like to see these profits for our, you know, promoting Ukrainian ideas and so on. And if you cannot find it in the program, you have only good fee for the participation or something like this, but you cannot find this connection with the audience, with interviews, with some talks with decision makers and so on. I think that for me, it is not important to travel. Yeah, I will have a lot of opportunities after the war. I hope if I will be alive, I will attend festivals, you know, and enjoy these things. So if I can prioritize, my main task now is promote Ukrainian culture. When I'm abroad, usually I'm speaking about Ukrainian culture as form of, you know, of resistance. I'm speaking about the importance of culture in everyday life, and I'm trying to gather this attention to the topics of decolonization and so on and so on. It is not like promoting books or plots in my novels. It is not about this anymore. Son?
Well, I mean, in my case, I can leave the country because I'm 62, 63 very soon. But I travel a lot, and I prioritize the events with a maximum of audience and with many interviews, including TV interviews, organized. I mean, when I was last year invited to Bologna, I was promised several thousand people on the main square of Bologna, Piazza Maggiore, and I had 3,000 or 4,000 people listening to me, and I was talking about Ukraine, not about my books. So these events are much more important for me than small chamber discussions between intellectuals without access to larger audience.
Hello, can you hear me? Thank you so much for what you had to say today. And I have a comment and a question. And my comment is that as somebody who has several different languages and who has translated literature and poetry as well, I think it's true that there needs to be you know, many more people, and that takes time to grow, you know, a generation of translators. But also from my experience of translating, I think this work is often undervalued. And it's also important to have resources so that people who can translate are focusing on translations, and those who are, you know, thinking about their profession, they have like a reason to choose translation as a way of life, an additional reason. So I am, for instance, very encouraged and very happy to see that there is this program now, you know, in this institute that encourages translations. So I think that's my comment about translations. And then I have a question to both of you. Earlier, you talked about the phenomenon and thinking about why poetry readings, literary events, cultural events, books are much more in demand in Ukraine today. And you know, when I think about literature as somebody who is trained as a philosopher and who works a lot with literature, what I think is this definition of a human being that a Georgian philosopher, Merab Mamardashvili, gave, that a human being is a being who needs to make meaning of their life. And I think that literature is able to do just that. And so, you know, in critical times, especially when a lot of things lose meaning, when a lot of, for instance, by being destroyed or abandoned, people kind of realize certain things, see certain things more clearly. And I think that's what might be happening in Ukraine. I just wanted to ask you to comment whether you would agree with this, that this need for literature, especially fiction, eventually, you know, in time, is because literature helps make meaning, make sense, and people need to make sense of what's happening. And yeah, if you wanted to comment on this idea. But thank you both, and thank you with the organizers.
Thank you. I agree with you, but it's not only that people want to make sense of their life, but they also perceive literature as a sign of normality, sign of stability. So they are clinging to culture because culture is something permanent and non-material when we are talking about literature. Because literature was making sense for them before they were asking about sense of their life.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. I totally agree with you. I would like to add some practical note to it, why it is so important and why writers can gather so huge audience or so huge sums of money. One of the reasons is also bad reputation, for example, of Ukrainian state as a state, political class, and so on. So in these days, you can feel like, you know, hero of uprisings in 1848, like Shandor Petefi, who runs a revolution, or some other guy, because people trust writers as some kind of rebels, but also symbol of the people who are in a way symbolically serving the country, serving the national idea, and so on. And it is quite strange situation, because it is like situation from romanticism, but also people in times of war, when we have this political life is stopped, totally stopped, when regular normal life is quite to foresee for few years. I think that people who are gathered at these events, for example, in 22, it was like this, that we are here. We met in the theater, and it was like a list, yeah, who are here, who stay in Ukraine, who is alive, and so on. And this feeling that there are a lot of us is also very important. It is some kind of creation of small society which is connected with some meanings and so on.
Thank you.
About corruption in Ukraine. So sorry, it's a joke. And thank you for your brilliant talk. And it's just my curiosity, but you both mentioned the high interest to Ukrainian literature during last 2 years. And my short question, how you imagine your readers in Ukraine during the full-scale war? Do you observe some changes in this collective portrait? Maybe.
In Ukraine?
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I'll start because every generation of writers is writing for his or her generation of readers. So my generation of readers is approximately my age, or maybe 10, 20 years younger. I don't think that young readers are reading my books. Maybe some of them, yes, but not. I'm not popular among the youngest generation of readers. And since my generation is less active on Facebook, I know less about their thoughts and what they think about my latest books.
So it is a moment when I can disagree with Andriy. Finally, or maybe he is not considering me as a young guy because I am reading his books and have a lot of pleasure. But yes, my audience changed a lot. I see that a lot of actually elder people started to order books or attended to these public events and so on. And I also see that very, very young. So these young adults, like people who has from 16 to 22, 25, they started to read. They were not interested in reading, but they're using very different platforms to, from time to time, I'm very surprised because some very young people are coming to me and start to quote some poetry. I quit poetry 12 years ago. Yeah, it is very, very old story, and they are listening to it in TikTok. And they are interested and they start to buy books and start to read and so on. So this audience, in terms of geography, in terms of generations, in terms of also, how to say, so before that, audience of Ukrainian writer was quite small, and usually it is like a joke, yeah? When a writer are walking in the city and met someone and he told him, last week I bought your book, and you say, oh, it was you. And we know our readers, with names and towns and so on. Now it is much more broader. And it is not only people who, for example, students or people with higher education or people from Lviv or KU. It is much more broader in from every angle.
Thank you.
I'm not going to ask about corruption as well, but I would like to join this words of gratitude to NEC for this marvelous idea to invite our speakers and have this beautiful evening together in this discussion. And maybe I would like also to add from a perspective of being a consumer, let's say a recipient of Ukrainian literature abroad, actually 2 years abroad. And technically, it happens like this. I order books via this possibility of ordering books online in Ukrainian shops. My husband delivers these packages from post points to our home. And once per 3-4 months that I'm in Kiev, I'm happy having all these books around me. And some of them accompany us to Frankfurt and then back. So it's a kind of practice for our family for recent 2 years. So, and for me, as for an adult, reading Ukrainian literature abroad, it's kind of therapy. Really, I feel this like a kind of therapy for me personally, and because I'm dealing most often with texts written in English, sometimes in German, and some other foreign languages, like reading texts in Ukrainian. It's a kind of, it's a sweet feeling inside to read your text in your native language. And for my son, because he's attending German school, how he's been instructed in German, it's a very essential element to sustain his Ukrainian identity. He attends Saturday school, so he learns Ukrainian on Saturdays. And it's a practice, let's say, in our community, Ukrainian community in Frankfurt. Then we try to support their self-identification as Ukrainians, because they are so small and they accept in everything, And from them, it's really essential. Yeah, this is like kind of how it happens and why it's so important, so significant inside Ukraine, but outside Ukraine as well. And there was, Andriy mentioned about these Ukrainian books which were taken during evacuation. Actually, the same situation. We were in full stress while evacuating from Kyiv, but still we took a tiny book of Shevchenko's poems. The title is like Shevchenko for Kids, something like that. But we had nothing with us, but we had this book of Shevchenko poems, so it really matters. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Andrey, at the beginning, you were talking about two cultures within Ukraine. Has the war changed the situation? Can we say that at present we already have a kind of unitary Ukrainian culture, or this, dividing line, even though somewhat more to the east, still exists? Odessa, for example.
No, actually, until the beginning of the full-scale invasion, the Ukrainian territory was not covered by Ukrainian culture. We did have pockets of the territories where Ukrainian culture was not considered their own culture. And these people, many of them who were Russian speakers, they were killed by Russian army by missiles and bombs. Some of them who survived, they left for Russia. Some of them actually went to Ukraine, and then from Ukraine to the free territory of Ukraine, and then went as Ukrainian refugees to Europe. And I met these people who are actually, they are not consumers of Ukrainian culture. They were consumers of Soviet culture. This is interesting because we are talking always that part of Donbass was pro-Russian, part of Donbass was pro-Soviet, and this nostalgia was financed by Russia. And one of the favorite TV channels in Donbass was the TV channel called Nostalgia, which you can tune to now through satellite, which is showing not only Soviet comedies and Soviet films, but even the old programs from 1970s and 80s. And what is, I wanted to, if we are talking about Russia and Russian propaganda, from the beginning of the 90s, Russia was promoting Soviet culture as a Russian culture. They actually, they launched this huge series of the TV concerts, which were called Старые песни о главном, old songs about the main thing, the important thing. What they have now in their educational program in Russia, they have the lessons of patriotism, which is called разговоры о главном. So главное remains Soviet for them. And people in Donbass, those who were pro-Putin, they were thinking that Putin is restoring Soviet Union. They were like, not forced, but they were suggested to believe it by Russian propaganda, Russian media, by the fact that actually Russian artists were coming more often to perform in Donbass than in Kiev. And they were actually, I mean, they were reading Russian newspapers. I remember that when I came to the airport, Prokofiev Airport in Donetsk, when it functioned, there was a book stand, the books for sale. All the books were published in Russia, and they had my Russian editions of my novels on sale. They were 2 times more expensive than my Ukrainian editions. It was before my books were banned in Russia. So they didn't trust Kiev, they didn't trust anything, they trusted everything coming from the East.
Beyond this side of
the Of course. I mean, we the nostalgia is dead. Very often together with people who were nostalgic. Putin destroyed Russian language culture in Ukraine, and actually made it impossible to resurrect this culture after the war, because now, I mean, the Russian language culture will become a culture of small ghettos, of pockets. I mean, it will be ignored, and people who lost their relatives, they consider that they were killed by those who speak Russian. So in fact, I mean, this war to save Russian speakers ended up with the result that nothing Russian, including culture, will ever be acceptable in Ukraine.
Yeah. If I can add a few words, what Andriy just told. I think that it is long process, like with translators. Yeah, of course, people made the first decisions about switching the language to Ukrainian, or for example, more adult, more mature people decided that the children will be Ukrainophone and so on and so on. But it is a long process actually of this embarrassing of culture and so on, and it is the process which is not only about Russians. We have other national minorities. And for us, for example, there is no Ukrainian cultural policy which is formed and formulated and so on. We don't have a Minister of Culture for already 8 months, a year or something like this, yeah? And nobody pay attention to this and so on. So we cannot say that our state is promoting Ukrainian culture or something like this. It is really, this process is interesting because it is, the engine of it is moving from the bottom, from the people. And for example, in our region, in Transcarpathia, in which we have this huge Hungarian minority, Romanian minority, smaller but still important Slovakian minority, and so on. It is also a lot of things changed. Maybe first of all, because of the solidarity for people who speak Hungarian, it is harder to switch the language instantly, but we see a lot of signs of solidarity with Ukraine, with Ukrainian culture. And during the years of independence, these decades of independence, our Ukrainian culture lacked very important thing. It was usually about tears, sufferings, and so on. It was boring. And now it has this aureole of the victory. It has this aureole of bravery and so on. And it is sexy. Yeah, also for national minorities. And what we as a civic society has to do in this situation is moderate this process, because we are traumatized with this Russian colonialism and occupation of our public sphere by Russian culture, Russian media, and so on. But we cannot allow the situation that we will replace Russian culture, and overwhelm everything. In these days when I think that our state is, stepping aside from this process, it is very important to provide to our national minorities these really huge and broad rights, because this feeling of freedom and feelings that you can be successful as Hungarian or Romanian or Slovakian in Ukraine, it works much better than decisions that you have to speak Ukrainian and, it is some law or decision of the president or so on. So this process is long. Especially for national minorities which are not so close linguistically to Ukrainian. But it is ongoing. And I think that in my region, in Transcarpathia, it is very successful. It is really successful because it is covered with this kind of sympathy, with this some kind of solidarity and very human, very normal interest in something which was undiscovered or before.
Okay, and one last question from Georgie.
I fear it might be a rather uncomfortable question, especially from the point of view of what has been said lastly. But on the other hand, I received some encouragements that the question might be also of some interest. Hearing what you had to say just now. Maybe I would start with a small remark concerning Romania in the 40s and 50s. Well, we all know that Romania has had its own traumatic encounter with the Soviet Union. However, something very curious happened in the world of Romanian literature readers. They never lost their love and affinity for and with the Russian classics. It's something very curious. Romanian readers never stopped reading and loving the Russian writers, novelists, poets, and so on. And I remember a word said by our most eminent anti-communistic dissident, Monica Lovinescu, about Russian writers. She said the Russian writers were always on the side of the victims. They were always on the side of the victims. Maxim Gorky is the first who took the side of the oppressors. This is an interesting phenomenon in Romanian culture because politics were somehow distinguished from literature. So my maybe uncomfortable question would be, what is the status of Russian literature in Ukraine now? What is the status of the Russian classics in Ukraine now and for the future readers? This is my first question. And my second question is, what is your relationship and the relationship of your colleagues with your Russian colleagues, with your Russian contemporary colleagues? I was reading in the last years Guzel Yahina, for instance, what Monica Lovinescu said about Tolstoy and about the others you could say about Guzel Yahina also. She's a writer who is on the side of the victims in Russia. What is, or is there any relationship between you and your Russian colleagues nowadays?
Okay, I will start. First of all, I'm ethnic Russian. I was born in Leningrad. I grew up in Kyiv. I had many, well, not friends, but colleagues whom I knew in Russia 25 years ago or 30 years ago. I am not in touch with anybody who is in Russia. I'm still friends with Vladimir Sorokin. I know Akunin personally. I know Lyudmila Ulitskaya and those who are now abroad and who are now banned, who are now enemies of people in Russia. I don't read Russian literature already for practically 10 years, from 2013. I'm not considering Russian literature, Russian culture part of my culture. I am Russophone, but if we are talking about identity, identity is usually made of language, history, and culture. So my identity is made actually of Ukrainian literature, Ukrainian history, Russian language, and Ukrainian language. Because I speak Ukrainian from 1970s. I learned it as an adolescent. I worked as an editor in Ukrainian State Publishing House in the Soviet time, etc. The status of Russian literature before the war was foreign literature. It was studied. Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, they were in the school program, in the university program as part of the world literature. So the special subject Russian literature, which was obligatory until 1991, was changed into world literature. I think Ukrainians will not be interested in Russian literature 20, 30, 40 years after the end of the war, and then it will come back as part of world literature. For many Ukrainians, Russian classical literature is unacceptable because when Russians bombed theater in Mariupol with people inside, Then when they occupied Mariupol, they covered this theater, ruins of the theater, with the walls from tissue with portraits of Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, and Pushkin. In Kherson region, there were billboards with Pushkin and his quotations about the south of Russian Empire, that this is a beautiful part of Russian Empire. I mean, Russian literature was instrumentalized and culture by Putin and turned into the weapon. So, I mean, you can say that actually with this weapon, Ukrainian culture and Ukrainian writers were killed. So you don't accept it, it's okay, because you were not in this theater which was bombed. I have a right to say this because I am on this side of the border. I was woken up many times by explosions. I had to become a displaced person, a refugee, a person who returned back to Kiev, etc. So for me, today, Russian culture does not exist and will not exist until I die. For my kids, it's up to them to decide, because when I was 11, in the school, I was asked by a teacher, do you want to learn English or German? And I remember I said, I will never learn German because Germans killed my grandfather. I learned German when I was 37, when I was asked to learn German by my Swiss German publisher, Daniel Kehl, a very legendary person who was friend of Federico Fellini and Friedrich Dürrenmatt. And I learned it in order to talk in German to Germans, Swiss, and Austrians. So I accept that maybe in 40 years, there will be Ukrainians who will learn Russian in order to use it for the culture. But for myself, it's not a question. Sorry, can I add a couple of more words? Because I was talking in the beginning about mentality and the border of mentality. The main difference also between Russian and Ukrainian mentality is not only that Ukrainians are individualists and Russians are collectivists, but also because on the basis of what I said, for Ukrainians, freedom is more important than stability. For Russians, stability is more important than freedom. Ukrainians rush to the front lines to defend their freedom, because without Ukraine, there is no freedom for Ukrainians. There is only a choice to remain under Russian Empire or to escape and become a migrant. Russian culture and Russian literature is responsible for the cult of fatalism among Russian intellectuals. Fatalism is a foreign notion for Ukrainians. There is no fatalism in Ukrainian classical literature because we didn't have Dostoevsky. And so, I mean, we should understand that actually the Soviet Union was not one nation. People were different and Ukrainians were different, and they didn't follow in the steps of Russian culture. They didn't create Ukrainian Dostoevsky, Ukrainian Tolstoy. And they are now free to decide what to do next in the culture, not following also Western tendencies. So, I mean, Ukraine has its own way, its own cultural way, and we will see what will happen to Ukrainian literature in 10 and 20 years, and I'm sure it will be different from Polish, from Romanian literature, and it was always different from Russian literature.
Thanks once again, Andrey and Andrey, and everyone is invited for a glass of wine and yes, for some yes.